Hello everybody, welcome to my psychoanalysis for dummies sessions. Today we will talk about depression. Lately, a lot has been said about depression and suicide in an effort to break the stigma around mental health. I know the topic is dramatic. However, I wanted to take a positive approach in my short lesson and explain you with a different angle what is depression, why does it happen, and most importantly, can we prevent it and how? Depression is a mental health disorder with big social impact. Not sure if you have thought it this way. Believe it or not, more than 70% of the people suffering from depression are under 45 years old. Yes, it is very sad and dramatic. These people are in a moment of their life where they should be working, building relationships, traveling, building a life. However, they spend more time in bed than people who suffer from arthritis, hypertension, gastrointestinal issues, or back pain. Very dramatic. What is depression then? Why does it happen? There has to be a few conditions or requirements in order to be in a case of clinical depression. And you are going to be shocked, but depressed people are not people who are sad. Depression is a mental health disorder, very painful, which happens in the same exact way than another process, not pathological, grief. Every time I lose someone, I love my dad, someone I love, for example, my dad died, my boyfriend left me, I need to grieve. It is a necessary process. The time we need to process that loss. For some time, I won't be interested in the outside world. I will only be interested in things which remind me to my dad or to my boyfriend. I will need some time to let my dad go, because if a loved one dies and I don't detach from him, I will die with him. This is quite obvious in all people who have spent their lives together. When one of them dies, unfortunately it happens that the other one follows, because they could not let the loved one go. The first difference between grief and depression is that grief is temporary. It also looks like a mental health disorder, but in the end, reality wins over. I acknowledge the loved one is no longer here and I let him go. It is a normal mechanism. Second difference is that in depression, there is a decrease in self-love. There is self-reproach. I can't love. I can't work. In the case of grief, it is not that I can't. It is that I don't want to. If grief lasted too long, it could become permanent. That will then be a mental health disorder. So, if you're experiencing an important loss, you cannot overcome it, and you feel your grief is lasting too long, please call a psychoanalyst. You can avoid depression. Psychoanalysis understands the unconscious processes behind depression and can help you prevent it. Okay, then, according to psychoanalysis, why do we get depressed? First of all, there has to be a loss of a loved object. The loved one can be a person who dies, for example, my dad dies, or someone who abandoned me, for example, my boyfriend leaves me, or it can also be an idea. Oh, when I left my job, I thought having my own business would be different. The idea I had does not correspond with reality. Most of times, the loss is unconscious. People who are depressed don't know what they have really lost with that person or idea. It has to be a love object that has been chosen in a narcissistic way. What does this mean? What is a narcissistic choice? It means we love ourselves in that object. I know, this is complex. Let's go a step back. There are two ways, always unconscious, in which we choose our loved objects. First, an eclectic choice. We choose people who satisfy our needs, like for example, our mom or our dad, or in a narcissistic choice. We choose people similar to us or to who we would like to become. In order to develop depression, there has to be a loss, most of times unconscious, and we had chosen that love object narcissistically, which means we love ourselves in that object. Very complex, I know. I'll try to go slower. Depression can be as crazy as psychosis in the sense that we can harm ourselves to the point we can kill ourselves. That intrigued Freud. How is it possible? How is it possible that the ego kills the ego? Then he realized of what was happening. You are going to be shocked, but people who are depressed are not, as I told you, people who are sad. In reality, they are silent killers. I know, unbelievable. Listen why. What happens in that depressed people could not let go and replace the person who abandoned them or died. And because they could not replace him, they identify with him in order not to lose them, and now they became part of themselves. This is very unhealthy because the lost object takes now a space in the ego. So when someone commits suicide, they don't want to kill themselves. They want to kill the person who abandoned them or died, and now is part of their ego. They have no energy. Why are depressed people are always so tired? Because they have no energy. Normally, they suffer from insomnia. Why does this happen? It happens because all their energy is stuck in the conflict between the ego and the love object. If he decides to let the love object go or not, that is the conflict. There is a rigidity in their psychic energy, which is making them sick. Remember that when I spoke very briefly about libido, I explained that we all have psychic libido, what we call libido, and in order to be healthy, that energy needs to be in constant movement. How? Every time I'm interested in something, my libido goes to that object and then gets back to me. For example, if I watch a movie, my attention, my energy is on that movie, and when it finishes, it gets back to me. In reality, it is a lot more complex than that, obviously. This is a blunt explanation, and it's so that you understand what is going on in depression. What happens in depressed people is that all their energy is focused in that conflict between the ego and the love object. Do I let it go or not? That is why depressed people have no interest in the outside world. Most likely, if they were to watch a movie, they wouldn't be able to focus on it because they are not interested in movies. They already have a lot of entertainment in their heads. You might find it surprising, even strange, but mental health is deeply linked to the ability to replace. So that you understand, I need to be able to replace my mom's breast by the bottle and the bottle by the spoon in order to grow up, to become an adult, to grow up. Make sense? And not only to be healthy in order to grow, evolve, and transform ourselves, we need to be able to replace that love object, which for some or another reason does not exist in reality anymore. I know, for you, it might be difficult to understand that we need to be able to substitute what we love. The ability to replace is a health marker, an indicator. However, people who are depressed don't have that ability. They cannot replace. To them, the object they have lost is contingent, necessary. It has to be this boy and not any other one. Let's say my boyfriend leaves me and me, instead of forgetting about him and start dating and meeting other boys, I get stuck in my ex-boyfriend as if there was the only boy on the earth. How many times does this happen to girls or to boys? This happens a lot. Women whose husband dies very young and they don't get married again because they are loyal to their husbands. Or the girl or boy whose boyfriend leaves them and gets so depressed they can't think of anything else. Their whole lives fails. On top of that, Western culture and education makes it even more difficult. To our culture, the loved object is very important. However, in reality, what matters is the drive to love, not what I love. People who are depressed find it very difficult to replace, and culture makes it more difficult for them. Imagine someone who gets depressed because they have lost their love object, they can't replace it, and on top of that, culture emphasizes it even more. And what is worse, these people have chosen that object narcissistically, what means that when they lose that object, they can't replace it. they can't replace is like if they have lost part of themselves. I'm going to say it again. It means that when they lose that object they can replace is like they lose part of themselves. That's why depression is so painful. What we have seen for now about depression are cases of pure depression. However, many times there is also what they now call bipolar disorder, which is in reality a type of depression with maniac episodes. It is a type of depression in which the patient goes through episodes of depression and episodes of mania. But what is mania? When Freud started to investigate this phenomena, he thought, maybe in that conflict between the ego and the love object, mania is when the ego wins over temporarily. This is exactly what happens in grief. Once grief is over, the person experiences joy. Where is that joy coming from? The person has let the love object go and choose to be alive, to remain with other human beings who are alive. That joy happens from being alive. That's where it comes from. In order to understand depression, we have compared it to another process, which was grief. Now, in order to understand mania, we will investigate what happens with joy. Where is it coming from? We feel joy when the energy which was stuck on something else is freed up. Let's see it with a very blunt example. There was this man who had to work very hard to make it to the end of the month. One day, he won the lottery. Now, all the energy he had on the everyday hard work is free in the form of joy. When we get rid of coercions, we also experience joy and happiness. All the energy taken by that repression or coercion is free and now available to be used for something else. This is a bit what happens with mania. When the ego wins over temporarily, the love object, the energy, is free. That is why the maniac in the maniac episodes, the patient has so much energy. They are euphoric. They have a lot of activity, but it is very unproductive. Exactly the same that when they are depressed because they have lost something, but they don't really know what they have lost. In the maniac episodes, they experience a sense of victory, but they don't know what they have defeated. I know it is quite complex. Good news is that I hope you realize there is an explanation behind what is happening. Without knowledge of psychoanalysis, everything seems crazy and doesn't make any sense. However, a psychoanalyst can unravel what is going on. Bipolar disorder should not be a chronic disease. It is a tough one, but psychoanalytical therapy can treat it. The patient would need an intensive treatment, but it's worth it, especially if we take into account the terrible side effects of the medications with which traditional medicine treats bipolar disorder. I'm not going into detail, just in case some of you have any experience with any of these disorders. Without going into too much detail, to start with, they damage the thyroid, they end up with hypothyroidism, it impacts the renal function, and with only these two side effects, imagine all the other problems these drugs generate. So, if the patient was initially depressed, imagine how they will feel with this medication. That is also the main reason of patients dropping treatment. Once again, with psychoanalysis, it will take time and effort to solve the issue, but it is possible. For now, we have talked about depression and bipolar disorder. There is also depression with anxiety. There are people who suffer from chronic thoracic pain, headaches. They go to the doctor and they find nothing. It could be a case of anxious depression. Anxiety creates symptoms in the body, as we already talked about in the previous sessions, and those symptoms mask depression. So, it would be difficult, unless you have psychoanalytical background, to realize that the problem of that person is that he is depressed. Because what that person has are symptoms, physical symptoms, which have become chronic. Treating that person with psychoanalysis would solve the depression and clear the symptoms. In our next session, we will see how being depressed can lead us to sicken our body and develop an organic disease, which is awful. But we will also see how, thanks to psychoanalysis therapy, we can prevent it. I hope I see you next time to learn more about how you can prevent depression. Have a good evening. Bye.